sped the 20-odd miles across I-70 rather than drive the old country roads. If Jim passed through Stoll at all, it was on the way to the state park at Clinton Lake. But today, Jim was on a quest. He had to find out if the stories about the devil baby were true. Until 1899, the settlement where the cemetery is located was known as Deer Creek Community. It then renamed itself after the postmaster, Sylvester Stoll. The post office was closed in 1903. Stoll was too tiny to have its own zip code, but the town kept the clerk's name. The tiny burial grounds, also known as Emmanuel Hill, on Deer Creek, was established in 1867 on a rise just off the two-lane country road that goes through town. If Stoll can even be called a town, indeed, fewer than 24 people live in the small collection of houses along the highway. A man named Jacob Hildebrand donated the land for the graveyard. Ironically, when one of his children passed away and he needed a plot, the cemetery board wanted to charge him for it, so he wound up burying the youngster on an adjacent piece of property. Jim turned his Cherokee up the gravel path and parked at the edge of the cemetery. The graveyard was completely surrounded by a chain-link fence and a red and white no trespassing sign hung prominently by the locked gate. Jim looked around. There was no one in sight. What harm could it do to hop the fence? Yes, if he were caught, the maximum fine would be $1,000 and up to 6 months in prison. But he was a reporter. Didn't he have some kind of immunity? Just as Jim was about to climb over, a patrol car with flashing red lights came up the drive and stopped next to his Jeep. The county sheriff swung out of the car and sauntered over to where the reporter was standing. Yes, officer. Can I help you? Well, I was just about to ask you the same thing. What brings you up here to the old cemetery? Jim explained who he was and how his editor wanted some new take on the legends about the son of Satan being buried here. It was said that the devil boy could cause buildings to burn down, and his voice had been caught on video and tape recorders. Was any of that stuff true? Nope, never seen or heard anything about that, the sheriff assured him. Nobody has, but every year about this time we get hundreds of crazies out here trying to see him for themselves. The locals don't like it much. Can't say as I blame them. How would you feel if some of your family was buried here and a bunch of drunken, stoned kids started running all over the place, spray painting tombstones, knocking them over? That's why we put up the fence. Not that it stops them half the time. If no one was around, they just jump over. Before Jim had a chance to admit he had considered doing the same thing, the policeman offered to tell him the whole story if he followed him to the diner where he was about to have lunch. Jim went along and he got an townsfolk would never see him, but he had escaped by chewing off one of his own hands. The lad was on the loose for almost a year, murdering anyone he came into contact with. Eventually, a farmer tracked him down and killed him. The residents of Stoll, unaware of the body's parentage, allowed the fiendish child to be buried in the nearby cemetery, although they never put a marker on his grave. Because of its purported connection to the devil, Stoll Cemetery acquired many nicknames, such as Satan's Burial Ground and the Cemetery of the Damned, but the one that seems to have stuck is the Seventh Gate to Hell. But how can anyone believe such stuff? Jim asked the officer incredulously. And where did it all come from? The sheriff told him that although the folklore had been part and parcel of Stoll for more than a century, the story never took hold until it appeared in the student newspaper at a Kansas university in 1974. The article changed the old legend slightly, saying that the devil appeared in Stoll Cemetery twice a year, on Halloween and the vernal or spring equinox. On the night of March 20th, 1978, more than 150 people, mostly rowdy college kids, showed up at the burial grounds to see Satan and his lost souls appear at the stroke of midnight. Many decided that the spirits of all the people buried in the cemetery, no doubt including the demon boy, would rise up and join them. The unrestrained crowd trampled the grounds, causing extensive damage. Unfortunately, the free-for-all that night wasn't a one-off. Visiting the graveyard on the last night of winter and on October 31st became an annual ritual. By the late 1980s, almost 500 people from merely curious to hardcore devil worshippers were showing up on Halloween. In the 1990s, deputies had to be brought in to maintain order, and by the end of the decade, conduct had become so bad that police were dispersing crowds long before the witching hour. Something had to be done, the trooper told Jim as he finished up dessert, and that's why now no one is allowed on the property without a permission. It's sad, but at least the people buried there can rest in peace. Or could they? Although Jim was given a perfect hook on which to hang his story that year. The debunking of the devil baby by an officer of the law, the infamous legends would never really go away. People still say the ghost of Satan's son walks the grounds and that he is a shape shifter. He can change into a cat, always a witch's favorite, a fiery-eyed hellbound, or most often a werewolf. Also, when Pope John II attended a World Youth Day conference in Denver in 1993, he is said to have ordered his pilot to change the plane's flight path so he wouldn't fly over unholy ground. Spirit orbs and luminescent ghost lights are said to pop up all over the property throughout the year, especially near the ruins of the old church that used to sit high up on the ridge overlooking the cemetery. I thought I lost my place. I didn't. We'll keep going. The chapel built back in the 19th century had been unused box on her unmarked grave. Locals will not only swear that the ghost stories are a bunch of hogwash, they are truly upset about the trouble, heartbreak, and vandalism the rumors have caused the community. All they can do is tell the truth and hope folks will listen, but in the end, it all comes down to what people want to believe. What do you think? Have you been to Stoll, Kansas, to the cemetery? What do you think of the story? Write in the comments below. And if you enjoyed these kind of stories, whispered and soft-spoken and unintelligible, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell because I do upload often. Comment below too if you have a favorite ghost story